Good morning, everyone, and welcome from the National Open Disclosure Office to today's webinar, Sharing the Learning and Documenting Open Disclosure. Sorry for the very slight delay in starting, but thank you so much for joining us today. Just to let you know a little bit of housekeeping, all attendees are muted and you will remain mute throughout the webinar, but you're very welcome, and we would very much like you to engage with us through the chat box in the course of the webinar. Please do take a moment to introduce yourself through the chat box and let everyone know where you are joining us from today. Thank you.
Catherine, we
just to let you know that.
Sorry, Catherine, to interrupt you. The slides just don't seem to be moving there. If you want to give it a go again.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for letting me know that. No, is that okay?
Yeah, it's just coming up here now.
Just to let you know also that today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be put up on our Open Disclosure website in the coming weeks. You can leave your video switched off and remain muted during the presentations, and when you join, you can listen to the webinar via your computer, but you can also listen by telephone should you wish to dial in if your sound is unsatisfactory in any way, and the telephone details are there, and they're also going to be available to you in the chat box.
Sorry, Catherine, that screen still isn't moving on. I'm just conscious for the dial-in details. But if you want to stop the slideshow, it might work better just normally if you want to pick up the slides.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly.
I'll put the dial-in details into the chat now for anybody who might need those.
Thank you. Very sorry now about these technical challenges this morning. I hope it doesn't affect your quality of the presentations. Just want to let you know that we also have closed captions text available on this webinar, and if you wish to use that, you can click on the show captions icon on the bottom left of your screen. I also want to make you aware that we have Irish Sign Language interpreters joining us also this morning, Aoife Blake and Anna Giglioni, and they are supporting us with providing the sign language. So should you wish to have the interpreter assist you listening to the presentations, please click on the image of the interpreters, and you will see 3 little dots and within options, and you can move them to stage, and then you'll be able to see the interpreter during the presentation. The initial interpreter will be Anna Giglioni, and details on that will be included in the chat box for you also. Just to let you know that we have CPD accreditation for today's webinar. You will get 2 CPD points from the RCPI and 2 CEU credits from NIMBY, and that applies to attending the live webinar only. And you will receive a certificate then following the webinar upon application to the National Open Disclosure Office. Our presenters today, delighted to present, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. Our first speaker will be Angela Teisel, who's Open Disclosure Lead and Manager of the National Open Disclosure Office. And we're delighted to be joined by Mary O'Dwyer, Head of Quality, Safety and Service Improvement, HSE Midwest Community Healthcare. Linda McAvoy, Clinical Audit and Governance Manager, Beaumont Hospital. Noreen Kennedy, Quality Patient Safety Manager, St. John's Hospital, Limerick. And Kathy Sexton, Patient Advocate, Liaison Manager at Kelly Hospital, Menton Hospital. So we're really looking forward to these interesting presentations and really seeing how open disclosure documentation, an overview of the documentation, and then how it is being implemented in the different services. So I'll introduce now Angela Teisel as our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I know there's a few sound problems there with Catherine's. So if you didn't hear anything, I think Kelly's put most of the information into the chat for you there. So just going to share my presentation. Hopefully now it'll work. Okay, so can people see that okay?
Yes.
Just let me know. Yeah, that's great. So you welcome everybody to this morning's session on open disclosure, and just to give you some of the overview of this morning's session. So I'm going to be starting off the session just bringing you through some of the policy requirements around documenting open disclosure. And what we do know about open disclosure is that much more open disclosure is happening in the system, which is great, and we're getting that feedback from across the system, from our leads, from our trainers, from managers across the system. We know that open disclosure is being documented well in some services, but we also know that open disclosure is documented poorly in some areas as well. So hopefully from some of the information we give you today, we can we'll hope to see an improvement in the documentation of open disclosure going forward, because for those of you who attended last month's session on open disclosure and delivered by Asim Sheikh, who's a barrister at law and a lecturer in UCD, he gave us some very strong, lessons around documentation generally, and really, if it's not documented, it's not done really. So today we're just going to update you on the policy and on document open disclosure. We're going to look at some tools that are available for you to kind of guide you in doing the documentation as well as possible. And we're going to just use some case scenarios as well around open disclosure to demonstrate how you might document just that maybe low-level discussion, and also some of the more high-level discussions when you have an event where there's been moderate or higher level of harm to the patient. And then we're going to talk to you as well about some changes that are going to be happening on the NIMS system. And as you're all aware, there is a requirement to document open disclosure on NIMS as well. So just really to start off with, so at last month when we were advertising this webinar, we asked in our post-webinar evaluation, about what things you would like us to cover in this presentation today. And a few things that came up was really what is open disclosure, and what is a patient safety incident, and what is an open disclosure meeting. So we'll start off and we'll just look at those three things to start off. And so we're all pretty clear on what it is that we're talking about today. So open disclosure under the HSE policy definition is defined as an open, consistent, compassionate and timely approach to communicating with patients, and where appropriate, their relevant person following patient safety incidents. And where I mean appropriate there is that open disclosure to a patient's relevant person, or previously called next of kin, which we're not using that term anymore, really should be with the consent of that patient if it is an adult patient. So, and then the document, our policy goes into the details around open disclosure to the relevant person and considerations around that. So when we engage in open disclosure, we're talking about expressing regret to the patient for what has happened, keeping the patient informed, and providing reassurance in relation to ongoing care and treatment of that patient. Any learning that's been established by the organisation, and the steps being taken by that health service provider to try to prevent a recurrence of the incident. So really acknowledging, apologising and reassuring about ongoing learning and what we're going to do to try and prevent this happening again going forward. And what we know about open disclosure is that it's a discussion and an exchange of information that may take place in one conversation or over a number of meetings. So for your low-level event where there's been minimal or no harm to the patient, it will often be just a one-off conversation in the service delivery area, be it a residential service, be it in a hospital, a nursing home, whatever. And then for the higher level, where the patient has suffered a moderate or higher level of harm, there may be that initial discussion with the patient to acknowledge, and when I'm talking about patients, I'm talking about service users, clients of the HSE and HSE funded services as well. So there may be an initial discussion to acknowledge something has gone wrong, and then further discussions as more information comes to light, maybe throughout a review process of that incident. So just the meaning of an open disclosure meeting under the legislation, because again, some people say, well, what is an open disclosure meeting? And is that initial discussion at the patient's bedside where you acknowledge that something has happened, is that open disclosure? And yes, it is open disclosure. So open disclosure in the meaning under the legislation, and I'm talking here about the Civil Liability Amendment Act and the Patient Safety Bill, which has just been enacted now on the 2nd of May this year. It hasn't commenced yet, but it has been enacted. So what it means under that legislation is where a health service provider discloses at an open disclosure meeting to a patient, the relevant person, or a patient and the relevant person, that a patient safety incident has occurred during the course of the provision of a health service to that patient or service user. So just to be really clear around the meaning of open disclosure meeting. And then when we talk about patient safety incidents, what does that mean under the legislation? So patient safety incidents under the legislation include harm events, no harm events, and near miss events. So in relation to open disclosure must happen for all harm events. Generally, we'd say no harm events should be disclosed, but these can be assessed on a case-by-case basis. But really, if an incident has occurred, how do you know harm hasn't occurred if you don't discuss that with the patient or service user? And then near miss events, again, would be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And generally near miss events don't need to be disclosed, but if there is potential for that near miss event to become an incident or an event going forward, then open disclosure must happen then. So for example, a patient is coming in regularly for blood products to a service and something nearly goes wrong today during the service. Because they're coming in every week, there's potential for that near miss to become an incident going forward, and therefore there is a lot of benefits to discussing that with the patient to encourage them to take part in their safety going forward, and obviously you'll be alerting staff as well. So that is the meaning of patient safety incident under the legislation. So before we go into the documentation of open disclosure, I'd just like to take some of the learning. For those of you who attended our webinar last month, just want to start off with some of the messages that Asim Sheikh provided to us. So why do we keep good documentation? And really it's about ongoing patient care and quality. It's really an essential part of a patient's healthcare journey that we keep good documentation. It relates to the continuity of care and the safety of that patient going forward. We keep documentation because of clinical audit, to inform clinical audit, for trust, so that the patient has an ongoing and accurate record of their care and they can trust us to hold those records. For the defence of litigation as well, because records should form a reliable evidential base when it comes to something going into a legal domain. And one of the quotes that Asim used last month was, every practitioner must be taken as knowing that records may later be used in court proceedings or other investigations or inquiries, and hence their importance is self-evident. And the purpose of good documentation, it is an accurate record of treatment of that patient or care of a patient. It informs of standards of care delivered at that time. So the record of the patient's care, we can go back to that record and we can say, was that in keeping with maybe policy, procedures, guidance, standards at that time? And it may be evidence of practice at that time as well. So really just looking at the basis of good record keeping, it must be legible, and the time and date of the entry should be on the record. There should be a signature and name. We should omit abbreviations in that record keeping. omit irrelevant patient or colleague remarks, things that aren't helpful or have no consequence for the situation or what's happening at that time or the care. Keep records factual, so no speculation. Record consent very clearly, and that's a whole webinar on its own around consent. And then to document seminal events in detail. So the higher level of harm that somebody has encountered or experienced as a result of a patient safety incident, the more detailed your documentation should be in relation to that incident. So just moving on then to the policy requirements around open disclosure, and just some key points before we go into the detail. And it's really to keep good documentation of the open disclosure process. And as I said earlier, it is often, at one meeting or a number of meetings. So whatever, if it's one meeting or a number of meetings, all of those do need to be documented and a record of those kept. So just keep the patient record up to date in relation to all of these discussions. Maintain a record of the process, so the initial discussion with the patient, any follow-up meetings, any clarification requests, maybe following a meeting, and any additional information meetings that are held with that patient or the relevant person. Keep on record as well all documents relating to open disclosure in the open disclosure incident management file. For example, the minutes of meetings, letters that were sent out to the patient or service user or the relevant person. Provide the patient or relevant person with relevant documentation throughout the process. So, for example, when you hold an open disclosure meeting, and it's a kind of your high-level meeting with a patient, that a statement is sent out to that patient of a record of that meeting. So the minutes of the meeting are provided to that patient or the relevant person in a timely way following the meeting, so they can comment on it and they can seek any clarification if needs be. And when we come to legislation, this is going to be a really important part of actually complying with the legislation, both the Civil Liability Amendment Act and the Patient Safety Bill going forward. Also, and this is an area that we're not good at the moment, is actually recording open disclosure on the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment. And also in relation to the legislation, and you'll be aware of Part 4 of the Civil Liability Amendment Act, which brings the protective provisions around open disclosure. And then we have the Patient Safety Bill. And there is significant documentation within both of those pieces of legislation, which I'm not going to cover today, just to make you aware of it, because it's a whole webinar on its own. And with the enactment of the Patient Safety Bill and the revision of Part 4 of the Civil Liability Amendment, which is part of that Patient Safety Bill, we are going to be providing a full webinar on that bill and the change to the Civil Liability Amendment Act coming up over the next couple of months. So I will save the documentation piece until that time, because I think today I'd rather focus on the general documentation of open disclosure in relation to our everyday business. So let's just start off with a low-level event, so the documentation of open disclosure. So a patient has suffered, has been involved in a patient safety incident, and the level of harm has been none or negligible to that patient. So really, the details of the patient safety incident must be recorded in the patient's healthcare record, and you'll be filling in your NERF form, or if you've got electronic point of entry, you'll be putting this on to the NIMS database. Then with the patient, you'll be having a discussion with that patient at their bedside or in whatever setting the patient's in, and you record the salient points and discussed with the patient and or the relevant person during that meeting, to include the details of who was present at the meeting, so both healthcare staff and who was there with the patient if they had a support person with them. The information provided, so what happened, when, how, or why it happened, if you have those facts available. And as I say, stick to the facts, and then any response you give to questions or clarifications arising as a result of that discussion. I'm going to show you an example of this in a moment. The impact of the patient safety incident on the patient, if there's any impact, and the details of the apology provided. And this is really important that, when we look back at open disclosure, we can see that that patient was provided with a sincere and meaningful apology, and that is documented in the healthcare record. And then any agreed actions around their care plan or their treatment, or any actions to manage the incident or review the incident, again, you would actually record that in the healthcare record. So just to give you an example of that now, so this is documenting a low-level event, a medication error. And on this occasion, Mary, as a patient who is administered an additional 2 paracetamol tablets in error within a 3-hour period, as her paracetamol was prescribed PRN and also regularly on her prescription chart. So just an example of how you might document this open disclosure meeting. And we just have the assist model here for you. So you can see how the assist model can be used to actually document. So the assist model is a communication model that we use for how to engage in open disclosure, but it can also be a model that you can use to guide your documentation in the healthcare records. So for the acknowledge part of the assist model is I informed Mary that a medication error had occurred and explained to her that this happened due to the way her paracetamol was prescribed on her medication chart. The sorry, I apologise to Mary for the error that occurred and for the anxiety she experienced as a result, if Mary has been anxious, of course. The story is that Mary said that she was feeling okay. And the inquiry, she asked if this could happen again, and that's where might be her anxiety has appeared. And then the solutions is I reassured Mary that her prescription chart had been amended immediately to ensure that this will not happen again, that all staff will be informed of the incident. And when you use, it's okay to use the word incident or to say to the patient, this is an incident and this incident will be reported on our incident management system, to acknowledge to them that this is an incident for you as a service. And then the travel piece is, so to Mary, we're going to continue to monitor your blood pressure and pulse today. I'm going to check in with you later, Mary, and just check how you're doing. And if Mary requests that one of her family is told, and again, with her consent, then you may say, I'm going to speak to your daughter later about it, Mary. And if you've any question, Mary, just check in with me or the nurse in charge later if you've any questions or clarifications. And then you would sign that record. But also you'll see here that you're also indicating who is at that open disclosure discussion as well. So this is just an example of how you can document a low-level event. And there's not very significant documentation here. Then you'll also be required to document the open disclosure on NIMS. And currently this is the fields that are on NIMS currently or on the NERF form. So has open disclosure happened? And you tick one box, yes or no. And if no, to write down the reason why open disclosure hasn't happened at that time. So in relation to the work that we're doing currently with the enactment of the Patient Safety Bill, we will be developing these fields on NIMS further to meet the data requirements for the pending Patient Safety Bill and to be able to provide assurance to the Minister that open disclosure is being managed in relation to the notifiable incidents that are going to be in that Patient Safety Bill going forward. So is the data resource we will be using to provide assurance to the department, to the Minister, that, for example, the notifiable incidents that are coming up in the Patient Safety Bill are being disclosed and they're being disclosed at the right level, including the documentation around that disclosure. So this is just an example of some of the changes that are going to be happening on NIMS going forward. So at the moment, the open disclosure questions are on the review screen on NIMS, but going forward, open disclosure data will be able to be entered on the entry screen. And then any data entered on the entry screen will automatically populate in the review screen on the system. And these are currently the data fields that we are looking at. So, and this is for the patient safety. But for the patient safety, is this a notifiable incident? And there'll be probably a drop-down box for notifiable incidents in the patient safety bill. We'll be looking at the date that the service became aware of the incident. That sometimes can be different to the date that the incident happened, because you might not become aware to sometimes days or weeks later. And there'll be a field around that an open disclosure meeting has happened, the date that the open disclosure meeting took place, that one of the two exemptions, and this is the exemptions under the Patient Safety Bill, does not apply. So if the open disclosure meeting didn't take place, there'll be a drop-down box then, and we'll be putting in the two exemptions under the Patient Safety Bill, which one of them is the patient has refused open disclosure, and the second one is that we're unable to contact the patient to engage in open disclosure. And there will be an other section as well, so to deal with situations where perhaps open disclosure is being deferred, and we'll be likely putting in some drop downs around that as well. But again, that's just works in development at the moment, and those changes will be going over to the department or the State Claims Agency to make those changes on the system for us. We have a full work group with representation from community and acute services and patient reps as well on this group, looking at what those fields are and the work we're doing on NIMS in relation to it. The next field then will be that a statement in writing was sent to the patient or relevant person. So that is the minutes of the meeting. And under the Patient Safety Bill and the Civil Liability Amendment Act going forward, it will be a requirement that that statement was out within 5 days of the meeting taking place. But this relates only in relation to the notifiable incidents that are in the Patient Safety Bill. And then the next field then would be that the statement in writing was sent, so the data was sent. So then we can do then an analysis on NIMS of looking at, has an open disclosure meeting happened, when the incident occurred, if it didn't happen, why not, and that the statement in writing was sent, and it was sent within the time frame of 5 days. So that's just the change that are coming down the line around NIMS. Now, in relation to the Patient Safety Bill, there will be a lead-in time to commencement of the bill. We're not sure how long that lead-in time is just yet. We'd expect in other countries it has been up to 2 years. I'm not sure what lead-in time we'll get, but this work will be done on NIMS to coincide with the commencement of the Patient Safety Bill. Moving on then to if you have a higher level event, so a patient has suffered a moderate or higher level of harm as a result of a patient safety incident. So again, there'll be the initial discussion very often with the patient, not always, because if the event comes to light later, maybe after the patient has been discharged home. But generally, if something happens during our care, there'll be that initial discussion with the patient. And again, just like our slide previously, the initial or the salient points of that discussion will be documented in the healthcare record. Who was present, the information provided, the known or likely impact of the patient safety incident on the patient, and the details of any apology provided, and any agreed care or treatment plan, actions or next steps that have been agreed with that patient or the relevant person to manage the incident and to try to prevent recurrence of the incident. So this must be documented in the patient's healthcare record. And also at this stage, it's also important that you document the name of the designated person. So this is the contact person who's been assigned to be that person who will maintain contact between that patient service user or their relevant person during that open disclosure incident management incident review process. And you can enter the name of the designated person in the incident management or the open disclosure file. And then also the details of the incident will be also documented on the NIMS system. So that's your first discussion. And then moving into then your higher level open disclosure meetings. So you've had your initial discussion, you've gone away and you're doing your review and you're having a meeting and to update the patient or the relevant person on that review. So this meeting will be minuted. So when you're planning for this meeting, you'll be planning who's going to be your note taker through this meeting. And it's not necessary to take verbatim notes of the meeting, but it's really important to just document the salient points that are discussed in that open disclosure meeting. And then that these notes will be provided to the patient or the relevant person in a timely manner. And as I said earlier, for the patient safety bill, for notifiable incident, that will be 5 days. And these notes may be taken in various ways. So you may take minutes of the meeting. You may use a documentation template, and we have provided documentation for a template for you, for these meetings. Or you may just send out a letter detailing all of the minutes of that meeting. So when the minutes of the meeting are provided or a documentation template is used, it's also good practice to accompany the minutes or that documentation template with a supportive covering letter reiterating any apology provided. And I'll show an example of what that letter might look like in a moment. So for these meetings that are minuted, you should always make an entry in the clinical or care record that an open disclosure meeting has taken place, and the date, the time of the meeting, who the open disclosure meeting was with, and then to direct the person to where the detailed notes of that meeting are available. So that see the notes of the meeting which are available in the incident management file or open disclosure file for this incident. And then you sign that as the principal healthcare practitioner. So again, for the high-level open disclosure meeting, as I said, the information provided in the minutes letter will include the date and time of the meeting, the names and roles of those present, and the salient points discussed at the meeting. And under the legislation, these are the things that we need to, and under our policy as well, these are things that we need to record in that meeting. So the date and description of the patient safety incident, when and how the incident became known to the health and social care service provider, the key information provided in relation to the patient safety incident, so the facts surrounding that incident, how it happened, why it happened, and you might not know those questions at that moment, but whatever you do know, that you put that factually into the minutes of the meeting. How the incident has or is likely to impact the patient, and a lot of that you'll gather from the clinical assessment of the patient or from the story that the patient tells you in relation to their experience or how they're feeling following the incident that has occurred. The details of the apology provided, any agreed actions in relation to care plan or treatment, any agreed next steps, and the name and the contact details for the designated person. And this is really important because the designated person has such an important role to play in supporting that patient, service user, or the relevant person throughout that open disclosure process. And then any other matters relating to clinical care or treatment will be documented as normal within the healthcare record. So just to summarise here in relation to the best practice for documenting a high-level open disclosure meeting is always to consider the documentation requirements of the policy, which I've just talked to you about. It's always good to use a standardised documentation template, and I know that these are being used across a lot of our services, and the template that we provide, and there's a link to it there for you. Just to let you know, we'll be sending out a copy of these slides to all of our attendees today, so you can link into these documentation templates, and we provide them to you in Word format so that you can actually adapt those to local use. You can put your own stickers or your logos on it or whatever it is you want to do. So to adapt those for local use. And there's also our Open Disclosure Quick Reference Guide and Toolkit, which is available, which has your open disclosure pre-meeting checklist, your during the meeting checklist, your post-meeting checklist. It's got sample language in there that you use in open disclosure meetings. It's got language to avoid as well during open disclosure meetings. So all of those are there to help you to do this really well and to keep you straight in relation to the policy and also in relation to the legislation going forward. And just in relation to the legislation going forward, don't be getting too alarmed about the legislation, because the legislation is very aligned with our open disclosure policy, and there are just certain things that you'll need to do over and above our policy, and that the time frame about sending the minutes of the meeting out within 5 days needs to be met, and making sure the name of the designated person is recorded in the clinical or the incident manager open disclosure file. And really, you know, a message to you all today: if you manage open disclosure in line with the HSE policy, you will be meeting the requirements of the legislation. And just those couple of little extra things I mentioned are things that you need just to be careful about when we're talking about the requirements of the patient safety bill, and usually say the timing of the paperwork going out to the patient. So as I said, do make use of our documentation templates. They are in use and people do find them very helpful. I know that some of our speakers today are going to talk about other things that they have done about how to improve documentation of open disclosure in their service, which I think you'll find very helpful as well. So just again, just best practice, as I said, when you're sending out the minutes of a meeting or a standardized documentation template, these can be very impersonal. So you need to put a nice covering letter with those when you're sending out to the patient to personalize it for the patient going forward. So really in that letter to thank the patient and or the service user or relevant person for attending the meeting, to reiterate what the purpose of the meeting was, to inform them that the main points discussed at the meeting and actions agreed are attached in the meeting record or the minutes that you've attached. Offer them an opportunity to review the meeting record and to contact the designated person if they require any matters to be clarified or amended, or if any further questions or concerns arise as a result of that meeting. Include again the name and contact details for the designated person, and also to reiterate the apology provided at the meeting. It's always really good to reiterate the apology in that covering letter, because it really makes it personal, it really makes it meaningful and sincere when, again, you're providing a follow-up apology. So again, these are your options: minutes of the meeting with a supportive covering letter, or a completed documentation template with a supportive covering letter, or just one letter, which is a nice supportive letter containing all of the information that I mentioned earlier in that letter. Personally, I would advise that you would use a documentation template to make sure you're covering all aspects of the open disclosure process, or that you have a template that you're following for the minutes of the meeting. So just to make sure as well that that letter or documentation is supportive and personalised to the person involved in the given situation. So we don't like a standard letter that's sent out to everybody. That's not the way to go forward. Every engagement we have with patients who have been harmed as a result of the care should be personalised to that patient, that service user, that relevant person, and to their given situation. So this is just an example of a supportive covering letter. So dear, whoever it was, thank you for attending the open disclosure meeting on whatever date and time. The purpose of this meeting was to discuss the medication error that occurred on whatever date when you were administered an additional dose of your blood pressure medication. So you can see again, you're acknowledging again in that letter that the incident has occurred, and you're naming the incident in the letter. Please see the attached document, which provides the details of the main points discussed at this meeting and actions arising as a result. We have commenced work on the actions agreed, and we'll keep you up to date on developments through Ms. Angela Teisel, who has been appointed as your contact person for the service. Using the word designated person, patient might not understand what that is, so maybe to use simple language like your contact person. Angela's contact details are as follows, so you can provide the person's email address and their telephone number. Should you have any questions or require clarification on any matter discussed at this meeting or arising after this meeting, please do not hesitate to contact Angela, who is available Monday to Friday from 9 o'clock to 5 p.m. And that's really important as well, because that contact person doesn't need to be available 24 hours a day, just to make it clear that they're contactable at that email, at that telephone number within the working hours. Again, just to reiterate the apology, I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate my sincere apologies to you for the error that occurred, for the symptoms that you experienced as a result, and for the upset and worry that this has caused for you as you described during our meeting. The service is implementing the actions agreed to try to ensure that this does not happen again. And then your sincerely, your signature, and then insert the name and the role of that. And usually this letter will go out from a senior person, like the principal healthcare practitioner involved in the care of that patient. And then if you're enclosing any documents, to put what your enclosures are, either the documentation template or the minutes of the meeting. So that's just an example, as again, it's something you can amend and adjust that yourself to the situation. So just to move on to things to avoid in documentation. So really, when you're sending out these letters, to try and avoid medical jargon as far as possible and any defensive type language. Legal terminology such as words liable and negligent, to avoid that in documentation. Any speculation So if you don't know the answer to something, don't speculate, just carry on with your review. And, you know, when you do get an answer then, and you have a factual answer, to give that at the time, but it's always best not to speculate. The other thing that we can get into is to blame. So starting blaming a person, blaming the organization or whatever it is. So again, that's not something that should be included in documentation. And as I mentioned earlier, these non-personalized standard communications. I remember in training a way back a number of years ago, somebody told me that they had a template apology that they sent to everybody, and I thought, oh my goodness. So really, any apology should be personal to the individual or the relevant person affected and to the situation they're involved in. And we do provide sample language to the apology. And again, at the end of the section, you'll see a resource where we've got a resource document on managing the apology, the language to use and the language to avoid. And maybe, you know, sometimes we hear things like an apology that isn't an apology. So I'm sorry that you feel that way. Well, that's not an apology. That's, you're sorry that they feel the way they do, but you're not saying you're sorry for what happened to them or for an error. And of course, you know, things can go wrong during a patient's healthcare journey that maybe isn't an error, maybe it's just a result of a complication or risk of their you know, their treatment or their illness. And it's still okay to say sorry and to say that I'm so sorry this has happened to you. I'm so sorry that you developed this condition. I'm so sorry that things haven't worked out the way that we expected. So again, sorry is always appropriate, even when an error hasn't occurred, when a patient has an outcome they didn't expect. It's always appropriate to say to that patient, I am so sorry this has happened. I'm so sorry that, you know, that you're feeling the way that you are as a result of this. Again, we shouldn't use abbreviations, and then the words however and but are no. So I'm really sorry this has happened, however. So when you use the word however or but, it tends to then negate the first part of the sentence there. So it's better to just stop or put a full stop there and then start a new sentence again, but don't use however and don't use but in your documentation or in your conversations with patients around open disclosure. So these are just some of the resources that are available to you. So the checklists, again, the links are all there, the template, the quick reference guide, the assist model of communication, and there's posters of the assist model that you can put up into your work areas as well to guide you. The management of the apology, again, and then numerous other resources on our open disclosure website. So just go on there and have a look at them. They're all there for you to try and make this a bit simpler for you and to try and guide you to do this as best as you can. And at that, I'm going to just pass on now to my colleague, Mary O'Dwyer. Mary is the Head of Quality, Safety and Service Improvement in HSE Midwest. And she's going to talk to you about patient safety culture and documenting open disclosure. And then at the end of all the presentations, then we'll be doing some questions and answers. So I'll pass over to you, Mary. So thank you very much.
Come off mute. Good morning, Angela. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this open disclosure webinar. Every time I sit in and listen on one of these webinars, I always come away learning something. So already this morning I have notes. So thank you, Angela. As Angela said, my name is Mary O'Dwyer. I'm the Head of Service for Quality, Safety and Service Improvement in HSE Midwest Community Healthcare. And my presentation today will focus on open disclosure and how it fits in our bigger patient safety culture. We all know that culture, our organizational culture, it's made up of our values, our beliefs, our assumptions, and our biases. And they really dictate how decisions are made in an area and how work is done. And I suppose for the patient experiences culture in decisions that are made about them or with them, and behaviours that they see, hear and feel. So patients experience a safety culture by the information that's shared with them about their health and social care needs, about the plans, about how their treatment is progressing, about any outcomes, and sometimes it's adverse outcomes and adverse events. What say that the patient has in the next steps, and how they feel their rights are respected. So really, open disclosure is part of the bigger picture. Documenting open disclosure, it is part of the bigger picture. It's part of our safety culture. It's how we do things around here to protect and continuously improve the quality and safety of care that's provided to the community that we serve. I know Angela has been asking people to put questions into the chat, but let me ask I think it's almost 400 people are on the call today. Let me ask you a question. Hands up, any of you who have never made a mistake at work. And I get the same answer today that I get every other day, no hands up. So we know that things go wrong in healthcare. We know that internationally. If we could maybe move to the next slide, but we also know that from our own research here in Ireland, the Irish National Adverse Event Study found that for every acute hospital admission, 1 in 4 there will be an adverse event occurring in 1 in 4 of every acute hospital admission. And as you know, an adverse event, it's an incident which results in harm, and that harm may or may not be due to error. And just, I suppose, for our own clarity here, an incident, the definition of an incident includes adverse events. It also includes near misses, and it also includes complaints from staff or patients about events which may have been associated with harm. The National Patient Safety Strategy that many of you are familiar with talks about the common causes of harm that are experienced in Irish healthcare. Things like medication errors, things like pressure ulcers, patient falls, violence, harassment and aggression. And, you know, I suppose when you think of adverse events, bear in mind it's an event which has resulted in harm, which may or may not be due to error. Research would say that around 70% of adverse events would be preventable. So if we know that incidents happen in healthcare, part of things that happen in healthcare as well should be responding to the patient when something goes wrong. So it should be part of our normal habit, our normal routine. And sharing, if we maybe just move to the next slide there. So sharing information with the patient about their care and treatment is a normal part of our patient interaction. It's our normal habit here at work. And I suppose this communication is even more important when an incident occurs. When an incident occurs, having that conversation, you know, disclosing the information, that's part of the normal process. And I suppose, you know, the patient may not be, may already be aware that they're at risk of a particular condition in their condition. So for example, a pressure ulcer or a fall, they may be already aware we've assessed them as being at risk of that. So it's not something that's going to be a bolt from the blue in many cases. And again, in the conversation, as Angela has said, the patient should hear what happened. They should hear that we take this seriously, even saying things like, I am reporting this incident to my line manager. An incident report form will be completed. We will review what happened and we will talk to you about what we found out. And it's important to share the information with the patient about what we did learn, because sometimes we learn that despite our best efforts, despite having all the measures in place, despite carrying out the appropriate actions, that an adverse event did occur, such as a pressure ulcer or a fall. And the patient needs to be a part of that conversation and they need to hear the outcome. So when an incident occurs, it's a normal part of our incident management process to disclose the incident to the patient. And, you know, as we all know, sometimes this disclosure takes place over time as information emerges. documenting the disclosure is important from the patient's perspective, and it's also important for our colleagues. Look, healthcare is really busy, changing environments. Think of our rosters. So to ensure that the colleagues on the roster are aware of where we are in the open disclosure process, to ensure that continuity of care, that's where the documentation in the healthcare record is really essential for continuity of care. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit around, how disclosure, the steps involved in disclosure. And as I said, disclosure can take place over a number of steps. So I'm going to use the example of a stage 2 pressure ulcer. So this is the type of thing that you would see in a healthcare record around a stage 2 pressure ulcer. I advised Tom that while we were observing his skin today at 9:10, a stage 2 pressure ulcer was detected on his right heel. There's a red area, approximately 2 by 2 centimeters. I apologized that this had happened, and Tom said that he actually noticed a tenderness on his heel. Changes to Tom's care plan to treat the pressure ulcer was discussed with Tom. This is a normal part of our process. This is a normal interaction with our patient. We advised him about the need to reposition regularly to prevent other pressure ulcers and to keep the pressure off that spot as much as possible to help it heal. The pressure ulcer information leaflet was given to Tom. I answered his questions. A photo of the pressure ulcer was taken with Tom's consent. This is all part of normal pressure ulcer management, isn't it? I advised Tom that this will be reported as an incident today to Jane Doe CNM. I explained that Jane Doe will be meeting with Tom to talk about this incident. I asked Tom if he wanted me to talk about the pressure ulcer with his contact person. And Tom wants his daughter Anne to be told what happened. And I saw a question in the chat earlier about what do we use instead of next of kin. So that's a question we're all working on at the moment. So that's, I suppose, that's the step 1. If you like, that's open disclosure at the bedside when I detected that Tom had a pressure ulcer. And then step 2 then is where we have the conversation with his daughter Anne. And this is something that Tom had asked us to do. Conscious again, under the assisted decision-making capacity bill, it's very much involving the patient and they dictate who we talk to or who we share information with about their healthcare. So again, step 2, and somebody mentioned there, does it always have to be in person? Well, the reality in healthcare is a lot of our conversations are either online, they're phone calls, and they may be in person. So for step 2, this is a phone call by the staff nurse, to the person nominated by the patient. So I explained to Anne O'Brien that Tom asked me to ring her to advise her about a pressure ulcer that developed on his right heel since he was admitted to our ward on the 28th of April. Anne told me she knew what a pressure ulcer was and wanted to know, how did this happen? Was he okay? I apologised for this happening to Tom. I told Anne that when I was checking his skin today at 9:10, I noticed a stage 2 pressure ulcer on his right heel. Same thing, it's a red area, approximately 2 by 2 centimetres. We have started a treatment plan to heal the pressure ulcer and prevent other pressure ulcers developing. Tom needs to reposition regularly to keep the pressure off the spot as much as possible, and that we'll be checking his skin now twice a day. I explained that since Tom was admitted, a special mattress was in his bed to help prevent pressure ulcers. I explained that pressure sores are always reported in the HSE as an incident, and the CNM, Jane Doe, will be reviewing Tom's care. In line with the HSE policy and open disclosure, Jane Doe will talk to Tom about this incident, and if Tom wishes, Anne can be there with him for that meeting. Anne said she would talk to Tom about this when she comes to see him tomorrow. So now we've done step 1, we've had the conversation at the bedside, and then step 2, we spoke with the person that Tom asked us to speak with about the incident. And then the final step, or I suppose it's really another step, is step 3, where there's the formal conversation with the CNM and Tom. And this will be documented again in the healthcare record. So present at the meeting, Tom and Anne O'Brien, who attended at Tom's request, Mary Murphy, staff nurse, and Jane Doan, CNM2. See notes of the meeting, which are available in the incident management file. And it's really important that that signpost is in the healthcare record. Firstly, to say this is where you'll find the notes of the meeting, but also it's to guide the person in the next shift to know this is where we are on the open disclosure process. And you know, there might be even a step 4 after this, because at the meeting, maybe there were actions agreed that Jane would follow up on, or Mary. So I suppose they're the skeleton of an open disclosure for a pressure ulcer, but this could be adapted to a fall or to any other healthcare typical, if you like, the common causes of harm that we're all aware of. And then finally, if we move from the patient, I suppose, to the wider ward or to the wider health service and our patient safety culture. Documenting open disclosure in the healthcare record, some of our wards have gone one step further and taken it up at a ward level. And that's where they make incident data visible on safety boards, using tools like the safety cross or the safety stick, where incidents are recorded in real time. A green day is a day without a fall or maybe without a pressure ulcer being detected. A red day is a day that an incident is reported. And I suppose these are critical pieces. The behaviour that we have at the bedside is mirrored by the actions that we have at the ward, and they're all foundation stones for patient safety and for learning. And finally then, just on my last slide, open disclosure and documenting open disclosure. When an incident occurs, it's a normal part of our incident management process to disclose the incident to patient. This disclosure could and probably does take place over time as facts are established. It's the same as their treatment or their care plan. That's not a static thing. So documenting disclosure is an important part of the process, both from the patient's perspective and for our colleagues' perspective, to ensure continuity of care. Patients' understanding of the information regarding their condition and care is essential for them to make informed choices. And I suppose we're really, really conscious of that now, following the enactment of the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Bill and the patient safety bills. Documenting open disclosure is part of the bigger effort, an effort that all staff across the whole service contribute to the delivery of high quality, person-centred care. And it's a core part of our patient safety culture. And always remember, the patients experience culture in what they see, hear and feel, and decisions that are made. Open disclosure is part of our safety culture. In my presentation, I shared with you an example of a disclosure of a low harm incident. And I also spoke about the safety boards, which reinforce the open disclosure conversation at a ward or a service level. And I look forward to hearing the next presentation's other examples of how we share and document open disclosure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And I see more questions coming into the chat there, so we'll look at those in a few moments when we get to the end of our presentation. So just moving on now to introduce Linda McAvoy, who's our next speaker today. And Linda is the Clinical Audit and Governance Manager in the Quality and Safety Directorate in Moment Hospital. So you're very welcome, Linda. Over to you.
Lovely. Listen, thank you very much, and thank you, Angela, and everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Lovely. Thanks a million, and thank you for having the opportunity for speaking today with everybody here. And it's great webinar, especially following up from the last one from Asham, which was absolutely so educational. It's really good to have this continuity. I'm going to talk briefly today just in relation to quality improvement plans that we've been doing in Beaumont Hospital in relation to the documentation. So at the start of this year, we mirrored our quality improvements to mirror the work streams that's going on with the National Office, one of which is looking at our mandatory training and getting that up to speed. The second big project for open disclosure was looking at our documentation. We had previously in the last year and in the last year and a half been doing spot audits across the hospital in relation to open disclosure, but by the time these audits got done, they were past, the incident had happened. So with review and looking at, you know, what was coming down the line in relation to the patient safety bill, we devised our methodology this year that the audits will be done in more of a real time. So every second week, our hospital has what's called a serious incident review team meeting. And this is where all category 1s, category 2s, falls or incidences, SRE incidences, or serious incidences are discussed at this meeting. What we've done then from this meeting is that we take note of the healthcare records. We go up to the wards while the patients are still in and the healthcare records are still there. And we review the healthcare record for documentation in relation to the first meeting when this happened and any subsequent follow-up meetings as required. We also provide a weekly bespoke kind of quick snap education sessions on the ward or with relevant staff, looking at maybe 10, 15 minutes, you know, quick fire questions, what to document, what not to document. Next slide, please. We developed an audit pro forma very much based on what has previously been discussed here. And Angela, you went into great detail there at your slides of what we should be recording at these meetings, and especially, you know, looking at our salient points. What we're more interested in, and this is from our previous audits, we knew that the higher level incidences have good documentation where there is, you know, you're preparing for your high level meeting, you do have those templates, and those templates and that toolkit that's available on the Open Disclosure website are absolutely invaluable, and they're a really, really good read. What we did notice was that the more ward level open disclosure meetings, your pressure injuries, your fractured wrist from a fall, medication instances, they were less likely to be recorded in the way they should have been recorded. You know, we would have got patient explained or events explained, but none of the actual in-depth details would be looked at. Our audit tool, as you can see, looks at the first meeting with every single salient point that should be in it and any relevant follow-up meetings. And this is what we looked at on our audit per week on the chart. Next slide, please. So the key findings that we found from our audits was, especially in kind of looking at January, our initial meetings were very much recorded either in the medical notes or in the nursing notes. The incident was recorded there. What we did also notice was that the specific details pertaining to the apology or to the declaration of regret was missing. While it was implied, and you could definitely take that it was implied from what was written down, the actual writing down that the patient was apologized to or whatever in relation to the expression of regret was not written. And I know it went back on previous slides as well, you know, if it's not written, it's not done. We were doing these audits very much in real time, so staff were able to even tell us the conversation they nearly had verbatim, but we were literally looking at the documentation. The other real finding from our initial audits was the documentation of our follow-up meetings. So our serious falls, our pressure injuries, even some medication incidences, they all have a review. you know, if that's a review of where you fall assessed coming in, did you have, you know, the right mattress for your pressure injury? Local level reviews that's carried out by the nursing staff. And the reviews are done, they're submitted, we've read the reviews, they're very well done. But again, it's going back to the documentation. Was the patient informed of what this review showed, or was the patient informed of review? And we found again that the documentation around this was quite poor. Whilst the staff recalled it, the actual evidence that it was there was not present in our healthcare records. And we focused very much on this as part of our education and everything else. May I have the next slide, please? As with any quality improvement, we have gone through many PDSA cycles, and we have tried, you know, different variations of how to get this done, and received very good feedback from staff on the wards. We have developed our own in-house open disclosure webpage with loads of information on that. We have a dedicated email address that people can contact us on. We have a direct dial number if people want to phone, and improvements were being seen. And with feedback and everything else, one of the biggest feedbacks we were getting off our staff was just to have some sort of sticker that everything is laid out for. So on the next slide, please. So we decided then the last kind of part of our PDSA, and we're trialing this at the moment, is that we have developed open disclosure documentation packs for the ward. So we developed a staff information leaflet, which goes into what is open disclosure, the salient points, and really kind of summarizing the policy in a paragraph. But when an error occurs, what does our patients expect? So they expect to be informed, openness, transparency, their apology. We have broken down the assist model in a very simple form, but giving some examples. And I know the slide is quite small there, but I can share this if anybody wants to contact me. But given a bit of language behind it as a quick guide to the assist model. On the other side of our trifold, then we have what should be documented. So what are our salient points that we should have in our healthcare records? And then on the back of our staff information leaflet, we have given areas to contact. We've given our PALS office, our risk and legal department, as well as our open disclosure office. Next slide, please. Then we went forward and we developed this A5 sticker. It is laid out as much as we could with the colors of the open disclosure, with the green and the yellow, trying to keep everything in line with the open disclosure. But it is also laid out, and we use these stickers for escalation of a deteriorating patient for the EWS. So we have this sticker type already in use. So our staff in the hospital are very used to this format of the sticker. So this sticker literally lays out your salient points of what will be discussed. It can be used if you're having it on the telephone, at the bedside. It can be used whether this is the very first open disclosure meeting or any subsequent follow-on meetings. It allows people to put down, and it provides the prompts of what should be written. You know, who's present in the meeting? What is the reason for it? So what is your incident, or what is the reason? What is your kind of review, your follow-up? What is the apology or your expression of regret? Other relevant information, your signature, your name. And open disclosure doesn't have to happen by just a nurse or just a doctor. So we've given the option for your medical council number, your NMBI number, or your Carew number, depends on who you are. This sticker and the information leaflet, this sticker and the information leaflet are all available in envelopes. And the envelope there, you can see, is again clearly marked with the open disclosure logo and colours, that this is a documentation pack to be used in an open disclosure meeting. And again, we have the information on how to get contact with us on that. So that whole pack is available on the wards. Sorry, next slide. Thank you. So in January, we had our baseline audit, which I previously explained. Month on month, and we're only analysing our April data at the moment, we have seen amazing improvement, both on our first meeting and any subsequent meetings. So on our initial meetings from January to March, we've had a 43% improvement. That's a 10 percentile point improvement. On our follow-up meetings, we've actually got a 4,000% improvement if you look at it on improvements, but it's a 43 percentile point improvement on the documentation of our follow-on meetings. And this is in the first quarter of this year. We're still doing the drive. We have our awareness week coming up in a couple after the summer. We're going out and about the wards promoting this. So already we are seeing an improvement in the documentation of these ward level incidences. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. So I suppose it's short and sweet. It's kind of putting together everything that both Angela and Mary has discussed in relation to what should be written. And it's to show that we've just provided this tool within Beaumont to help prompt people who are busy, who are on the wards, what they should be writing to improve our documentation and to keep us in line with the patient safety bill when it does come up. There's our contact details and my email address, but Angela always knows how to get in contact with me as well if anybody wants to direct any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Linda. It's very interesting presentation. I think in relation to seeing the improvement in such a short period of time as well. So I'm sure you'll be getting lots of requests around sharing some of your resources with the wider community. So thank you for that. So I'm conscious of time, so we're just going to move over now to Noreen Kennedy and followed by Kathy Sexton. We're both going to talk about various approaches using stickers and the audits they've done around that. So over to Noreen Kennedy, first of all, who's the Quality and Patient Safety Manager in St John's Hospital in Limerick. So you're very welcome, Noreen.
Thanks, Angela.
I'll just go into your present, seems to be just sticking a little bit here, so I'll just open it again.
Thanks very much. I'm going to talk today about the documentation of the salient points of open disclosure in the clinical file following a patient safety incident. And I suppose this started in 2021 following a review of an audit of using the incident management framework, the compliance with open disclosure and the documentation of the salient points in the clinical file. And we also noted during reviews that there was inconsistency in some of the documentation of the NERF forms that we received following patient safety incidents as part of the reviews. Also during meetings with families, it was identified that open disclosure would have happened or different things would have been said, and we weren't aware going back on the file of what and who had been spoken to. So that was great learning for us. And then obviously with the multidisciplinary teams at times, it was difficult to identify what was said again, and the salient points of the discussions were often undocumented. And through the audit, we also identified we couldn't identify who'd been spoken to, yet the staff were very clear and this hadn't been documented. So I suppose that's what triggered us to realise that we needed to improve our practice, re-educate and support staff better in terms of their documentation of open disclosure. Next slide, please. So it was quite a simple process. In 2021, we spoke to staff. We used the national guidance and we've modified that and made it available, and I'll show you shortly. We looked at what existed and the information was there, was clearly documented nationally what one is to document in the clinical file. We also reviewed the training we were delivering to staff, and we're part of the induction training in the hospital, so it was an easy place to induct and train staff as well in incident management and open disclosure. And we also took a lot of guidance from what the staff wanted. They wanted something simple. They wanted to know what they needed to write. They were eager, they were willing, they just didn't know what to write, what was allowed, what was the right thing. So next slide, please. So this is what we have. This is on an A4 page in portrait. It's laminated and it's on every ward in several places of just what to document. And it's taken from the national framework. And then if you can see on the right-hand side, there's just a sticker that is stuck in the file. So when there's been an incident, the nurse or doctor or whoever's involved just will put the little open disclosure sticker and then use the laminated page to go through and take their points from, you know, the date, the time, who was involved, who they spoke to, what was said. So it's that piece that the staff really wanted guidance. So the sticker is put in, just a small orange sticker that says open disclosure, and then the salient points and the who, the times, the dates, etc. are all documented within the clinical file. So it sounds pretty simple, and it was as simple and is as simple as that. But I suppose it's the engagement and it's the training piece with staff that has been the challenge, and the continual work through and you know the retraining and the re-education. So next slide, please. So the feedback we got from staff, you know, it was simple and easy to use, and that's what was requested from the outset. It was very clear, and the feedback is still very positive. We have got great feedback from the theatre department, from our surgical consultants, that it was very clear, very easy to use. And then through the open disclosure training, you know, staff were, you know, I suppose we blended together, and they, you know, very positive feedback around it's okay to say sorry. The implementation, you know, is ongoing. You know, there's a lot of movement of staff, so we're continually training with this piece in the documentation of open disclosure in the clinical file. Next slide, please. And these are our figures from our audits, and our category 1, as Linda mentioned, are fairly well documented in the file, and we have 100% compliance. However, in relation to category 2, there is improvement, there is more room for improvement, and I think in Mary's presentation, I think you've helped close the loop for in relation to category 2s, and giving such a clear and relevant example how to assist staff in actually what to document in relation to open disclosure. For example, with the pressure ulcers or falls, and we focus a lot on the guidance and documentation, but the actual live example of taking us through a story of a pressure ulcer, I think that will give great confidence to staff into what to document and the journey the patient continues on. And it's, you know, it's supposed that's something I'll take away from today, to give more examples for our staff to read on what is documentation of open disclosure, especially in relation to category 2 incidents, because you've all levels of staff documenting open disclosure for other levels of category 2 and minor incidents. So, and the last slide then, our current practice, you know, our documentation of open disclosure has improved hugely. You know, the audit we have complete yearly has improved. There is some room to go further. We, as I said, we open disclosure documentation is incorporated into our face-to-face training, and from today, I think using examples will be easier, getting staff to guide them through what an example is. We train staff in induction in open disclosure documentation, and we also have asked staff to document retrospectively if we notice during a review of the file that there has been nothing documented. Again, we'll re-audit at the end of this year, and we are aiming for 100% compliance. It has to be 100% compliance. So that's all here from St. John's.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
I know you presented to us last year on our implementation webinar, and it's just really, really great to see the improvements again from your audit for this year. So definitely, I think these stickers and, you know, the guidance that SERVs are providing are really making a difference in relation to you know, the practice of open disclosure. So well done again to all the staff at St. John's. I'm sure, Noreen, you're probably happy to share that sticker. I know you've previously said you're happy to share
Yeah,
the guidance you
absolutely.
have. So,
It's
yeah,
only a
if you want.
small sticker, like for example, the physiotherapy or other disciplines use. It's just, for us when we were trying to find that piece, but it also prompts staff, and then the lamination
Right.
documentation assists them.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Angela.
much, Noreen. And just pass over to our next speaker, Kathy Sexton, who again is going to talk about practices in Cavan and Monaghan hospitals around open disclosure documentation. And Kathy is the Patient Advocate Liaison Manager. So you're very welcome, Kathy.
Angela, I don't know whether you can see me, but I have a few technical problems. Can you hear me?
We can hear you anyway,
Perfect.
so it's fine.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Don't worry about my beautiful face. You mightn't be able to see me. Noreen and Linda really has given you a good overview, and probably a lot of my discussion is simply quite similar to that, But one of the pieces I might add in, because I know the time is quite short, we had commissioned an audit on open disclosure, and the standard was the open disclosure policy. We found, having used the policy as our guide, we were only really getting about 50% compliance on all of the issues in relation to open disclosure, in relation to documentation, all the processes that we followed. And that's really to give you a summary of it. As a result of that, and the reason why we had done the audit was because I had been offered an opportunity to test the quality improvement the open disclosure policy compliance checklist when it was in draft format. And as part of that process, those audit questions were coming up. So we were coming at first, and that was one of the first pieces. So we have a QIP in place as a result of that, and we are working on that. And I suppose one of the reasons why Angela asked me to speak, because I had tested, and I think it's a very good tool for us to use as leaders in open disclosure. And I think the reason why I found it particularly useful is it breaks down a very succinct, and it touches on leadership, the policy itself, how we're managing the policy, and how have we implemented the policy in our own organisation, around the legislation, and it gives you clear guidance in each one of these pillars in which you're looking for and where are you at. And it will also populate your action plan as a result of what you've found or what you plan to do. So I found that very useful. So now I have a very clear, so the other pieces in it is the supports for staff and service users, the support for our patients, and training, and our visibility. And I suppose that piece I found very useful, because you think once you do the open disclosure audit in the past, you had your work done. But what I found was, when I did this review of where we were at with open disclosure, I had quite a few QIPs on my plate, and I was working with a group of people to do the work on this. And it is quite time consuming to get the whole piece together, and the work that both my colleagues Noreen and Linda are doing is part of my QIP as well. I'm no different than what they're doing, and you can see I have an open disclosure sticker. We're using it. Even in my audit, I only found on one chart, I only found one sticker. Although we have this launched almost 6 months, we still only found it on one of the healthcare records where open disclosure was documented. So we have a lot of work to do, and there's an awful lot of resources required at ward level to try and support staff with this, and we're very happy to do that. And it's great to get the advice from the other speakers in relation to what they have done. But I don't want to overkill on this. I found the tool extremely useful, and I also found that it actually allowed you to assess whether you are completely compliant, and you had your red, your orange, and your green, and you could actually select them, and you could see what work you had completed and what work you still had to do. View. So quite very useful, because the QIP should have a start, a middle, and an end, and I found it helpful to have that template to use as part of my drive to roll out open disclosure. I'm not going to label the rest or labour on the other pieces, because I know my other two speakers have already spoken out, and I don't want to go over the time. I hope you're happy with that, Angela. I hope you're happy with that, and thank you for giving me the time to share it.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to stop sharing now, and we might go into just the Q&A session. So I just got some of these questions I can probably deal with myself, but I might just hand over some of them to some of our other speakers. So the first question that came up is, do section 38 and 39s complete NIMS? And the answer to that is yes, where NIMS is used by that service. So if NIMS is used, I think most 38s and some 39s might be using NIMS, but I know that's kind of work that's in progress at the moment. So where you have access to NIMS, it should be recorded on NIMS. Will the NIR form be updated? Yes, it will, in relation to the questions for open disclosure. The forms for the Civil Liability Amendment Act, so people have asked where do all the forms come from, and the Patient Safety Bill. So the forms for the Civil Liability Amendment Act are there already, and if you go on to the Civil Liability page of our open disclosure website, you'll find all the forms on there. And until the Civil Liability Amendment Act is amended, they are the current documentation that we do need to complete if people are seeking the legal protections of the Civil Liability Amendment Act. The good news is that those forms will be going with the Patient Safety Bill commencement, and that while there is still significant documentation attached to the Patient Safety Bill, that it is not in the form of legal forms as in the ones that we've used for the Civil Liability Act before, but there is significant documentation requirements attached to the bill. And again, we will be providing sample documents for you in relation to the bill, and developing template letters, etc., again, to make that process a lot easier for you. And again, as I said, that will be included in the training and education programs and resource development that we will be engaging in around the implementation of the bill. What if the patient wishes to record the open disclosure meeting themselves? And my response to that is always to assume that you're being recorded when you're in an open disclosure meeting. And if we're behaving in a manner that is professional, if we're sticking to the facts in relation to the patient safety incident, we shouldn't be concerned about our open disclosure meeting being recorded. And very often patients may record meetings without us even knowing we're being recorded. So if you remain professional, stick to the facts, don't engage in speculation, don't engage in anything that would be defamatory to another colleague or an organisation. Do as the policy tells you, then you shouldn't worry about that being recorded. But if a patient asks to record the meeting, it's important to find out why they want to record the meeting, to let them know that the meeting will be minuted, they will get a copy of the notes, and sometimes to tell them that once a recording device is included in the meeting, it can actually upset the dynamic of the meeting. But if they really insist, we should actually afford the person the opportunity to record the meeting. And it's always good practice for us to record the meeting ourselves as well, because you know that recordings can be tampered with. But usually when somebody wants to record a meeting, it's usually for the fact that they know that when they go home, they may not remember everything that was said within that meeting. What do we use instead of the term next of kin? Again, it's something, I mean, for open disclosure legislation, it's that person is called the relevant person. And I know that we will be looking at healthcare records. I'm not sure relevant person is going to be the right term, because relevant person under the Assisted Decision Making Capacity Act is different. The relevant person is the patient or service users themselves. So I think, again, that's work that's in progress. So I can't really answer that question for you. I mean, in relation to the record, it's the emergency contact person we should be asking for, and who are you happy for us to share your information with should that become necessary. They are the kind of questions I'd be thinking around for a healthcare record. The next question, if there was immediate open disclosure completed while the person was in the service and they are then discharged, is there a timeline in which the OD meeting should be held post-discharge? And no, not really. The answer to that is, it's just as soon as it's practicable, as soon as the the review has been undertaken and there's more information to be given to the patient. So again, if the open disclosure meeting hasn't happened while they're in the service, again, you would have that introductory open disclosure meeting to acknowledge the incident and to let them know what was been happening around that incident. And also, of course, it's really important that when the incident has been reviewed, that person is involved in, for example, the terms of reference and agreeing the terms of reference, having input to terms of reference of that. So really that communication process is continued all the way through that incident management and open disclosure process. What about answering the daughter's question, how did this happen? Again, you only answer questions with the information that you have at that time. You provide the facts in relation to what you know. And if you don't know, you just say, we don't know at the moment. However, we are going to be doing a review of this. It is an incident, as Mary and all of our speakers have said. It is really important to name it as an incident. We class this as an incident in our service. It will be reported on our incident management system, and as part of our normal process in relation to the review of this incident, or as part of a normal process, we will be reviewing this incident, and we will be providing more information to you when we get that review completed. Does it have to be CNIM2, or can the CNIM1 speak to the patient or relevant person? Again, for the low-level instance, it may be a staff nurse, but we always recommend that you'd have a person with you. So the CNIM1 is on duty, or the senior staff is on duty, that that whoever was on duty would go with maybe the person in charge to that patient to engage in the open disclosure. But for the higher level incidents where there's been moderate or higher level of harm, we really would be expecting it would be a very senior person, most often the most senior healthcare practitioner, who would be even having that initial discussion. So for the consultant, when something serious has gone wrong and a patient has suffered moderate or higher level of harm. Let me just see. I think that was it from what I can see from what have been given to me here. I think a lot of encouraging comments around the packs as well. And I think the stickers, I mean, I was so impressed by our speakers today and the work that they're doing around open disclosure and, the initiatives. Our office learned so much from the work that, that people are being so creative in the system themselves around trying to manage this difficulty and, making sure that open disclosure is documented well, because we've so much documentation to do, and we're very conscious of, our frontline workers and the expectations around documentation. So all of these initiatives are really there to help you, to make this easier for you, to have the templates there for you, etc. So I don't know, Gareth, is there anything else coming into the chat? Are there any other questions you want to bring to me, or if anybody else has any questions for our speakers?
Angela, there is just one other question there, which has come in. Do the medical team, for example, the consultants, complete NIMS? Is the question.
Well, there's no reason why the medical team shouldn't complete NIMS as well. I think it's very much down to the operational system. What is the normal practice? Maybe Linda, maybe could you come in there of what happens in Beaumont, maybe, for example? I think you're on mute there, Linda.
I know in Beaumont, it's members of the risk and legal department that input on NIMS themselves. So we have our own kind of e-form of an incident e-form that comes down to the risk office, and they have staff there that input directly onto NIMS.
Yeah, and I suppose with the rollout of the electronic point of entry, then I'd imagine that is something that going forward that consultants will be able to do through the EPOE rollout.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that tallies in with our systems in Beaumont. I know at the moment it is an e-system, it is an e-incident form that they do fill in, but that at the moment doesn't talk directly to the NIMS. So it has to be inputted then again onto NIMS.
Perfect. So thank you. So I'm conscious of the time that we have run over a bit, but I think it has been a very helpful presentation today, and particularly following on from Asine's presentation last month. So I do hope you found it helpful today. I would like to particularly thank our speakers today. We just work with such wonderful people in the system, the people that make it all happen on the front line for us, and we've just an example of some of those wonderful people today, Mary O'Dwyer, Linda McAvoy, Lauren Kennedy and Kathy Sexton, and to our own team here in the Open Disclosure Office, again for making all this happen for us, and putting these webinars together, and a lot of the work that goes into the preparation of the webinars. So just thank you to you all. I'd like you to thank Aoife and Anna our ISL interpreters today. It's the first time we've used ISL interpreters, and it's something we're looking at going forward and providing that service. So I think it is very important, Sarah, and that we can provide that in future webinars. So again, just thank you for that. And as always, you know, I never go away about the training. Just to remind you all that open disclosure training is mandatory for all staff. They need to complete e-learning module 1. And for staff who may have to engage in formal or the high level open disclosure meetings, they do need to complete module 2 and attend a face-to-face training. And to attend a face-to-face training, then you do need to contact the lead for your area, and the name of the leads are all on our website. Just to tell you, we have some very exciting webinars coming up for the rest of the year, but our next one will be on restorative practice and what restorative practice in healthcare looks like. And it's just something that the HSE Quality and Patient Safety Directorate and the incident management team within that director are looking to roll out across the system. And so we have 2 guest speakers from Maynooth University next month who'll be talking about restorative practice. Just moving on, Catherine. So just to also advertise the next Quality and Patient Safety Directorate Talk Time, which is on the 30th of May, which will be looking at the power of storytelling in relation to quality and patient safety. And if you go onto the QPS, just Google QPS Talk Time, you'll see then on that page a link to actually register. You do need to register for those events. And just to say, again, thank you to all our attendees today. A great number again today. And these webinars are for you. And I hope that you can get the feeling that we do listen to you by the presentations that we're doing for you. You will receive an email after today's event with a short survey on today's webinar. So if you'd really take the time to fill that in and give us some examples of what you would like to see coming up in webinars in the future. So thank you for that. And in relation to the CPD, I would like to apologise to all of our attendees for the significant delay that we've experienced in getting some of the CEUs from NIMBY. They've just been overloaded at the minute in relation to requests, so they have now come through. And if you do need to have a cert, we will get that cert out to you. We do have the CPD for this event, so we'll get your certs out to you. But if you want a cert, do email the Open Disclosure Office on opendisclosure.office@hsc.ie. So again, my sincere apologies to all of you who've had to wait, because I know it's the end of the year when you need to submit the CPD. So again, my apologies for that. And I think that's the end of our webinar today. So thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you next month. We might just move into practice there, Sandra.
All right, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.